Griffin. I'm with IEEE USA, and we are here today. We're partnering with Women in Engineering to put on the webinar, What's Gender Got to Do with It? We have three presenters today, Julie Mills, Judith Gill, and Mary Eyre, and they will be giving their presentation. Julie will be starting off, and I will let them do a personal introduction for themselves. So I will give it to
Okay,
Julie.
welcome
Please
everybody.
take it away. Thank you.
We actually wanted to start with a quick poll of those who are listening today, and I'm not 100% sure if that poll's working. Yes. Basically, we just wanted to know how many of you might be engineering faculty members or students. Okay, good. Some of you have started to fill the poll out, so just go ahead and fill that out while I'm talking. As we said, we'll just introduce ourselves, or I'll introduce everybody briefly. So I guess you're wondering why we think we're qualified to talk about this, what's gender got to do with it. It's a project that we've been working on for several years on and off, but in particular, I guess the Gender Inclusive Engineering Education is the title of the book that we published, which led to this invitation to do the webinar. And just to explain our positions, I'm an engineer. I worked for 15 years in industry as an engineer and then moved into academia, so I've been teaching engineering now for just about as long. And so that's kind of my qualification in terms of gender inclusive engineering education. Judy is a maths educator originally, and then moved into academia and has taught teachers for a long time, but also has had a particular interest in gender issues in education and has done a lot of research in that area. And then Mary, who will be talking third, is also a science and maths teacher originally, but has also had a lot of involvement with women in engineering programs, both as a member and also as an employee in those kinds of organisations. So that's just to explain a little bit about our background. And from the poll, only about half of you filled that out, but it appears that about half of you are faculty members or students. So the presentation itself is primarily geared towards people who are teaching engineering, but also has a lot of relevance for people who are interested in women in engineering in the workforce as well. Okay, so moving on to the first part of the slideshow. The first question really is, are there really so few women in engineering? It's something that's been talked about, but to some extent has kind of fallen off the radar over the last few years. And the fact is that, yes, there are still very few women in engineering. It's less than 20% in the majority of Western countries, certainly less than 25%. And the other disturbing thing is that it's actually been decreasing rather than increasing over the last few years. And there are some statistics there from Australia, USA and Canada that all show the same kind of trend, that it peaked in the early 2000s and has gone backwards basically since that time. In the UK, that's not that trend, but then again, the UK has been less and still hasn't got to the same amounts as the rest of the Western world yet. So that's not a great story either. And how does that compare against other professions? Well, the fact is that engineering is not doing as well as any of the other kind of major professions, and we're really losing the battle in terms of trying to attract the pool of talented and qualified women that are there to come into engineering study. We are not doing as well as architecture, medicine, veterinary science or law, for example. And these are Australian statistics, but they're not dissimilar in other countries as well. So in the workforce, the situation is very similar. The percentages of women are less than as students, and that's partly, of course, because there are older men that are still in the workforce, whereas there's basically no older women, as in there were very few women qualified, 30 years ago, for example. But the percentages of women in the engineering workforce are low, and the research data shows that a lot of those women leave even after they've gone through the process of getting qualified, they've entered the workforce, and within 5 to 10 years an awful lot of them leave. So that's kind of a whole other story that we won't be going into tonight, but that's just to kind of set the picture of what we're talking about and why we think it's important to have gender inclusive engineering education. So what are the 3 key issues for engineering education? We kind of think of them in 3 key areas. The first is actually attracting women to engineering in the first place, to study engineering. The second is ensuring that they're successful when they're studying engineering, and linked with that is retaining them in engineering study. So keeping them in until they've graduated, and then of course keeping them in long enough to get into the workforce. And the exact same issues apply in the workforce as well, attracting women to enter the engineering workforce and then letting them make sure they succeed in the workforce and then keeping them there. And in the workforce, certainly the keeping them there is the number 1 issue. In engineering, in education, probably the attraction is the number 1 issue, but the other 2 are also very important. And there's been a lot of research done over the years in terms of what factors are important in attracting women into engineering, and these are the kinds of things that continually show up in that research. The need to have supportive teachers and a supportive family environment are critical. Having strong role models helps. So if they know other women who are already studying engineering, but also even just strong role models, might be male role models that at least demonstrate engineering to them. Critical for women, women almost always cite that they were good at maths and science, and that was one of the reasons that they were attracted to engineering. Interestingly, that's not one of the reasons that most men give for why they were attracted to engineering, but it is for women. So that's an important thing to bear in mind. Excuse me. One of the other key factors that women cite in terms of engineering is that they want to help society. So there's a need to kind of emphasise the human issues side of engineering if we want to attract women, which of course is obviously a key area of engineering, but probably not emphasised enough in the kind of marketing that goes on. And then the experience of things like open days, career days, residential schools, those kinds of things are very important also in attracting women. In terms of what universities can do, or colleges in the US term can do to attract more women into engineering, one of the key things, again, that the research has shown is the importance of women in engineering programs. In Australia, it's no coincidence that the time when the vast majority of universities had strong women in engineering programs was the time when the numbers of women entering engineering peaked, and the time that those programs have been slashed with budget cuts over the last kind of 10 to 15 years has been the time that that percentage has dropped. So that's just the Australian experience, but overseas studies have also shown the importance of those kinds of programs. Some other things that can help are things like scholarships for women in engineering, gender inclusive marketing, which I'll show an example of shortly, role models, as in having more female lecturing staff or faculty members in American terms. But the other key thing to bear in mind from the college point of view is that attracting women into engineering is not the responsibility of the few female engineering faculty members that are already there. Those female faculty members, I can guarantee you, will already be picking up an extra workload in trying to support the women that are in the course, in the programs, and to think that those people are also supposed to be responsible to do all the outreach to try and attract them in the first place is not realistic and not fair on those faculty members. As I said, just an example of gender inclusive or non-inclusive marketing. The one on the left was a poster that was going to be sent out from my own university, sadly, to attract students to an open day presentation on engineering. And fortunately there was somebody in the marketing department who thought maybe I'd better run this past Julie, and so we kind of squashed that one and went for the one on the right, which I'm not saying is great, but at least it's a kind of improvement in terms of gender inclusive terms. And we'll go into more detail and later about why that might be. You'll get the idea of that. As I said, there are three key areas. So one of them is attraction, but the other ones are success and retention, and they're often kind of intertwined. What can universities do to help women to succeed and keep them there in engineering study? Again, the women in engineering programs are very important in providing support networks for female students. They can facilitate those. You may generate those support networks in other ways, but that's often the way that it is done. You do need to be aware some women don't like to be involved in women in engineering programs and don't like to be put in the spotlight in any way. They just want to kind of be part of the group without in any way being drawn attention to, and that needs to be respected as well. But other women do like to have the support of a network of other women students and other women faculty members that can support them. Studies have shown that increasing the exposure to industrial experience during programs helps retain students of both genders. Role models and mentoring, again, are important things. And the thing that we're going to focus on for most of this presentation is looking at the curriculum. Again, the studies have shown for retention that in fact the curriculum is a problem for most students. Retention is a problem for a lot of students in engineering, and if we can improve the curriculum it will help all students, but it will particularly help to retain female students. And I'm going to hand over to Judith now, who will talk to you about curriculum.
Okay. Can you hear me, Julie? Are you hearing me? Are you hearing me, Julie? No. Haven't got any sound coming from here. I can't. You can hear. Okay, thanks very much. The question then is, what does curriculum mean to your mind when you hear that word curriculum? One engineering colleague with whom we gave a presentation some time back told me that the word curriculum was never used in engineering circles, never used. He says it's meaningless. And after a bit of chat we realized what he understood was the list of topics to be covered in the course. Now I've got one message up to say my sound. Can you tell me about that? Can you hear me now? Yes, thank you.
Judith, we can hear you fine, Judith, okay?
Oh, fine, thank you. Okay, so I wonder what you think of curriculum. You might like to even type it in the chat sessions, because in education what we understand is that curriculum embraces the sum total of all the factors that contribute to what you do in the classroom, to what goes on in the classroom. So that means students and teachers together make curriculum. It involves the assumptions that educators bring and those of the students. Of course it is the list of topics too. It does embrace content, but more than that. It's prior learning. What have you learnt before you came to this classroom? What attitudes do people bring to the area? For educators, is this your favourite topic, or is it something you feel you have to just get through? There are different cultural and language backgrounds also that affect the way the lesson runs, the way the classroom works, the physical classroom arrangements, whether or not people can sit comfortably, can move around, can express themselves, teaching styles, seasonal issues, even things like a hot Friday afternoon. The idea of the curriculum embraces more than just the list of topics, just the formal knowledge that goes through. Why this matters in a consideration of gender issues in engineering education is that, as was noted in the recent King report here about engineering education, that all too often the engineering curricula tend to be crafted with overuse of masculine stereotypes and examples, such as automobiles, rockets, and weapons. Julie's demonstration of that in the clip of the Collins-class submarine, seen as a marketing device, was something that was immediately appealing to some sections of the population and negatively appealing to others. What we're urging here is a curriculum that includes everybody and includes examples that will be equally appealing to all the students, or to many of the students. What do we know? What do we know about women in engineering, construction, and science? We do know that males and females tend to have had different prior knowledge and experience with technology and science. There are many aspects of technology that constitute part of young people's playthings and growing understandings as they develop from childhood. We think about the toys that children are typically given. The technology of train sets is different from the technology of dolly prams and whatever. However, they both are technology. They're different sorts of experience. Women are often expressing an interest in the social context and the values of technology, the sorts of things that can be made to make life easier, the sorts of things that technology can assist in our everyday endeavours, as well, of course, in the solving of problems and the helping the traffic flow and the more standard examples of engineering. Another point of difference that comes out of the research is this notion of working collaboratively rather than working competitively. There is some evidence that women show a preference for working collaboratively, working in groups with others, whereas it's also true, and I think important to note, that some men express a preference for collaborative learning too, but more typically we get the distinction between men enjoying a competitive approach to learning and women enjoying a more collective orientation. So, what is then this thing called a gender-inclusive curriculum? Well, it's one that's been consciously designed not only to recognize and respond to the differences between individual students, but also to use these differences in order to enrich the learning experience for all. So it's a curriculum that does include some competition and some working together. It's a curriculum that does include some of those masculine stereotyped things, along with more socially oriented devices. It's a curriculum, basically, that builds a sense of men and women working together on joint projects that are in the general purpose of making society easier and more helpful. Well, that leads on to the question, how can I make my course more inclusive? I think the starting point here is to reflect on recent experience. How has your teaching been going? I also think it's a tall order, and it's important to involve the class in your efforts to make changes. In other words, this challenge of developing gender-inclusive knowledge shouldn't be left up to one person, but should be rather a mutual experience, talking to your class and to students in general about the ways in which they felt that their learning was assisted by the procedures that you have decided to put in and to use. Talk to them about whether or not they enjoy competition and collaboration. Talk about whether they enjoy examples from particular areas, some more than others. Try and make this experience one in which both students and teachers are interacting as human beings as well as learners and educators. Gender-inclusive curriculum, our tall order, means considering all the following components. It means thinking about the assumptions that you make about the students. Who are they? Where have they come from? What sort of backgrounds are they likely to have had? Make sure your aims and objectives are not just theoretical knowledge, knowing how, but also they involve social applications. Assessment. There are choices potentially in the area of assessment, or are you sticking to the one tried and true way? You will find that different profiles of students come out when you use different assessments. It's another way of recognizing difference. Of course there's content, and is the content oriented equally to masculine and feminine type issues? Are the teaching and learning methods personalized? Are they available equally or perhaps differentially to some of the students? In terms of teaching practices, what does that mean about what you think about learning? How do you think learning happens? And is what you do and how you go about educating consistent with your particular view of learning? What sort of learning environment do you create in your classroom? Are people equally comfortable with involving and interacting with the lesson or the class in terms of speaking out, in terms of responding to questions? Are your approaches available to be changed in ways that make for a more inclusive classroom? And of course, the big thing about teaching is that it's always a work in progress. It's essentially dynamic, and sadly, perhaps, from one perspective, teaching is never over, fixed, finished, for all time, the perfect lesson. I wish. The point to be made here is that making any of the components listed in the previous slide more gender inclusive will help, but ideally all of these components should be incorporated into the process. Making any individual course more inclusive will help make the program more gender inclusive. Again, ideally, the program as a whole should be considered. And now Mary's going to lead off with some more details.
Hello everyone. Picking up from what Judy's been saying, we'd now like to suggest how to make each of the components of the curriculum more inclusive. Of course, the extent to which any individual professor or instructor can influence the curriculum does vary. If you have responsibility for designing a course from scratch, you can build the inclusivity into all the components from the beginning. But if you're the guy that's been handed a course outline and told you're teaching this course this semester, you cannot at this stage change the formal parts of the curriculum, principally the aims and objectives, But as we'll show, you can influence virtually all the other components of the curriculum. Because we all as teachers have freedom of interpretation and applications of the curriculum specifications. So we'd like to emphasize that whatever your role in a course, even small changes can make a difference, small changes which make the curriculum more inclusive. So starting here with assumptions about students, both Julie and Judy have already talked a little bit about this. And when teaching any course, we all have assumptions about the students in front of us, or if we're designing the course, about the students we expect to enroll on the course, why they're taking it, how much they already know, and what skills they already have. And until fairly recently, when women and other minority students have started joining engineering classes, these classes tended to be quite homogeneous, male students with similar educational and cultural backgrounds. But as we've already heard, the more diverse the group, the greater the diversity in prior knowledge, interests and perspectives in the class. And if we make the wrong assumptions about students' interest and knowledge, we are in danger of making some of them feel excluded and disadvantaged, and this can lead to demotivation. Assumptions that can be wrong can, for example, be about the level of students' computing skills, or whether they've had tinkering experience, practical experience with mechanical and electronic devices. And so it is important to recognize that not all students will have the same proficiency, and we need to make provision for the students who need to improve their skills without stigmatizing this provision as remedial. And we do that by making this sort of provision open to all the class, not just to those who we identify as possibly needing them. So having clarified our assumptions or otherwise, being clear about those helps to formulate the aims and objectives of the course or program, which really is the most important part of course design. And often in engineering courses, the aims and objectives come out as purely technical. For example, understand the principles of semiconductor physics, or the properties of metallic compounds, or demonstrate certain laboratory skills. But research into successful engineering learning has, and again, this is what we've heard earlier tonight, shown that many students, including the female ones, are interested in how engineering meets societal needs and its social and cultural applications. So it seems sensible to include these in the aims and objectives as suggested on this slide. Now, it may not be very usual to consider how students will be assessed before specifying the course content, otherwise known as the syllabus, but we recommend doing this. We believe it's important that, having specified the aims and objectives, we think about how we will know whether these objectives have been achieved. And of course we would do this by assessing the students. So being inclusive about assessment, we need to be aware that some assessment modes and some context and language can favour some groups and individuals more than others. We need to be sure that our assessment techniques match the teaching and learning experiences which we plan to give our students. And we need to ensure that the assessment process is valid and just for all. And all these principles indicate the need for students to be assessed in several different ways, as shown on this slide. And later on, we give examples from a real course on how this can actually be done. Now we get to the content of the course. And sometimes suggested by engineering faculty that the curriculum content is based on universal laws and therefore cannot be adjusted in response to gender considerations. And of course this is true for some topics, be basic physical laws or mathematical techniques. But other parts of the syllabus are adjustable, as suggested on this slide. We can, for example, incorporate diverse interests by considering the applications of the principles we're teaching and include, for example, medical applications as well as military ones. Students report that they like real-world applications of theory rather than standard exercises. And closely related to that, open-ended problems rather than the sort which are going to lead to an exact conclusion. And after all, this is a good introduction to professional engineering. We can avoid using analogies that are gender or culture specific, such as sporting analogies. So, continuing on this theme, here are some more examples of how to make the content more gender inclusive. Give students investigative problems, include cross-disciplinary opportunities. Discuss the ways in which technology has improved lives. Now I'm going to hand over to Julie to talk about the next few slides.
Okay, thanks, Mary. I noticed that a few people are putting things in the chat box, so please feel free to do that because we are going to have time at the end for questions, and we'll pick up on some of the things, the comments that you've put in the chat box. So we can multitask, we can read that at the same time, so please feel free to go ahead. So teaching and learning methods, what we're really talking about there is that there are a whole lot of different ways in which you might teach engineering. But unfortunately, by far the dominant strategy that still exists is what we often call chalk and talk, which is basically somebody standing up the front talking and writing on the board, whether that's a whiteboard or a blackboard, and really not doing much else. And in the kind of US system, for example, having regular homework exercises and lab work and all that kind of thing. But there really are a lot of other ways in which you can teach engineering, and we'd urge you to consider using some of those because the variety of different ways supports different people's learning, preferred learning methods. And different parts of engineering lend themselves to being taught in different ways. So some of these multiple ways in which you can present engineering include problem-based learning or project-based learning, having peer-assisted learning, using case studies, computer-based or online learning, collaborative learning, open-ended laboratory exercises. There's really a multitude of ways, but unfortunately at the moment many of them are not used. And many of these different methods are actually more gender appropriate and more culturally appropriate for a lot of different groups. And in fact, basically more enjoyable both to teach and learn. And going on to that, PBL, somebody's just asked, is problem-based learning or project-based learning. It's often used interchangeably. Mostly in engineering, it's usually project-based learning, and in medicine, it's often used as problem-based learning. Teaching practices, this is basically not just the kind of methods that you might use, but in more detail, how do you actually implement those things? A lot of studies show that women often lack confidence in themselves and their abilities at the start, despite the fact that they actually might be doing very well, and that lack of confidence persists and sometimes increases during the course. So it's important to make sure that you give equal attention to students in the class. Think about things like how you're going to select groups. For example, if you're going to do group-based projects, how are you going to do that? How are those groups operating and making sure that they are operating to include all the members? Think about the language that you use within classes, making sure that you explain technical terms, that you allow people time to respond, because different groups of people don't feel comfortable responding immediately to questions. And basically what it's about is working to include all students within your class and building recognition of the difference that will always exist among students, but valuing that difference. So I'm just going to hand back to Mary at this point.
Yes, hello again. We've now reached the final component in our list of curriculum components, the learning environment. Though actually, to the novice, to somebody who's new to all these ideas, this component may be the best place to start. What this is about is we need to ensure that the learning environment is inclusive. That's making sure that all our students are participating in the learning and are not excluded in any way, whether consciously or unconsciously. This involves, for example, consideration of teacher-student and student-student dynamics. Are the more outspoken students, who are often the male ones, rewarded by more lecturer attention? Is disruptive behaviour inhibiting the learning of the less boisterous members of the class? And how can these aspects be changed? Is the atmosphere in the classroom friendly and open? And so on. And here we've got some suggestions about how these things can be explored and changed in trying to encourage all students to participate in the class. One device is to ask the students how the class activities can be modified to include them, to get them participating actively. And never tolerate racist or sexist remarks or jokes. And ensure that rules of behaviour are clear to all and are operated justly with all the class. Now we're going to move on to illustrate how these guidelines have been applied in a particular course, engineering materials at our university. First of all, the course is structured around industry case studies and practical demonstrations of material failures are given in class. And the environmental and human factors are considered. For example, the fracture of a marine oil pipe resulting in oil slick, of which we've recently had a rather spectacular example. The corrosion of steam pipes with potential for injuries. And then in tutorials, ask students to give judgments on legal issues regarding injury arising from material failures. Whose responsibility? Here we're bringing in the interdisciplinary perspectives. Then in assessments, trying to build in this range of assessment and the flexibility that I talked about earlier. This course has online quizzes, in-class quizzes, written assignments, practical reports. And the students who don't achieve 50% in these must sit the exam. Or students may choose whether to do the exam to replace the quiz results, but with a guarantee that their mark will not reduce. So you may be wondering, why is this gender inclusive? Well, first of all, the content approach has got those environmental and societal aspects which we've recommended earlier. The use of failures as examples are something that most students will be familiar with, and because there are often press reports on these sorts of things. And the flexibility and range of assessment gives students from diverse backgrounds the opportunity to choose how best to demonstrate their knowledge, which we've recommended earlier. And the rather important thing is that student evaluations of this course are consistently excellent. I'll hand back to Judy.
Okay, so we've only had time today to kind of give you a quick view of the kinds of things that you might need to consider if you want to improve the gender inclusivity of your teaching and curriculum. And we'd like to direct you towards some other resources that are available to help you with this. Apparently we can't actually share the screen to show you the website, so I can't actually kind of click on it. Well, I can click on it and see it, and I presume you can click on it and see it yourself, but then you can't see the rest of it, rest of us. So the project website that we mentioned there is a website that we've developed through the course of this project, which has been funded by the Australian Learning and Teaching Council. The website's still under development, and we're still adding course exemplars and things to it, and other resources, but basically it consists of a set of kind of introductory resources similar to the kinds of things we've been going through today, but also an additional number of exemplar courses giving you examples of things that are gender inclusive in these courses and why, and how they've worked, etc. So I'd urge you to have a look at the website after the presentation. The slides will obviously be up on the web for you to access. Similarly, a lot of the website work, or part of the main part of the project, was the writing of this book, Gender Inclusive Education. Again, I've given a link there, but obviously it's on Amazon.com or whatever. It was published by Routledge. So. And Anne's asked about whether this presentation is available at this website, and my understanding is it certainly will be as soon as the webinar's kind of finished, that it then gets posted on the website. But I'll let Daryl and Helen clarify that at the end. So in addition to those two resources, some other websites that we're aware of that give you some examples of gender inclusive practices in engineering education. We've got a couple listed there: Diversity Web, engineeringexamples.org, that you may be familiar with. We've also given a journal article there that is very useful, or in fact it's not a journal article, it's a chapter in a book which is by Burke and Mattis on women and minorities in science, technology, engineering and mathematics. But there's an excellent chapter there with lots of other examples from Irene Bush-Vishniak and Jeff Jarosz. And we've also referred to a few different reports within this presentation, and there are some other ones there about various aspects, not just about women in engineering education, but also in women in engineering in the workforce. Both in some of those are Australian reports and US reports as well. So you can refer to those afterwards. So at this point I'm going to get Judy and Mary to switch on their microphones as well, and we would like to open it up to questions for the next few minutes. The question about where can I download the slides, I'm quite sure that Daryl and Helen can maybe answer that one. Hopefully they can put that on, but my understanding is that they are put on the IEEE website on the webinar part. Daryl's online now, so maybe he can say.
Mary, just to let everyone know, yes, we will have the presentation as well as the slides available to be downloaded in a few days, probably closer towards the end of the week, Thursday or Friday.
Okay, thanks, Daryl. So basically, a few people have typed some comments as we've gone through, but we'd like you now to feel free to type in some questions in the chat box, and then we can respond to those questions.
While we're waiting for a question. Hello, Judy here. While we're waiting for a question, I wanted to say that I really enjoyed the comment that said I've avoided projects where I have to work with a partner. And this is someone saying, I like to do things by myself. Whereas others were saying, I really enjoyed collaborative working. That helped confidence. And so what we have is the idea of diversity within the population of people tonight. Given that, it seems to me to underline the importance of allowing for diverse responses in every teaching method that we apply. Thanks.
I'd also like to respond to some of the other questions there were about, I've only got one one student, one female in my class, etc. I should have also mentioned on the website we've got some FAQs, so frequently asked questions, so you might like to also have a look at that. Regina was asking, have we done experiments with pure female teams compared to pure male teams? We personally haven't done that, but there is some literature around about the composition of teams and which works better, and there's no, what I would basically say is there's no one right answer for exactly the reason that Judy was mentioning about the diversity that exists amongst all learners. There's also that diversity amongst female learners. So some women do prefer to work in female-only teams, but others wouldn't be seen dead working in female-only teams. So the answer to that question is really that you have to basically get to know the students within and give them options. So if you give them the options to choose their teams, they may or may not choose to form all-female teams. So and sometimes you need to force them into uncomfortable teams, and that's part of learning how to work in teams. But generally we wouldn't suggest that you have all-female teams. You will have all-male teams no matter what, because your sheer weight of numbers will mean you'll have all-male teams. I'll just go back and see what other questions there were. Hang on a minute.
Can I chip in there, Julie, and say I am aware of some research that was done in the business school that showed the greater the diversity of a group, the more effective and engaging the group tended to prove to be. In other words, diversity is good for making things happen when working together.
Okay, there's a couple of questions there about sustaining women in their engineering careers. As I said, that's kind of a whole huge other area, and I guess what I'll say at the moment is watch this space, because Judy and I are currently working on another book which is more dealing on women in engineering careers, but it's a very complex problem, and something just whipped over the other side, so, oh, thanks, okay, just made that a bit bigger. So I probably won't touch that one right at the moment. But there was another one there about in the context of the engineering education curriculum to prepare women better to sustain careers in academia and industry. That was something that we touched on. There's a paper that Judy and I published with two others that's in the Journal of European Journal of Engineering Education, which talks about that issue in particular, and some of the things that were important there, apart from one of them we mentioned here, which was about giving people the opportunity to have more industry experience within their program, but some of the other things were actually being very explicit about having some preparatory kind of program within the engineering degree, even if it was just a lecture or two, to actually talk about what it was like in the industry and what that was going to be, what that was going to mean, not just for the women in the class, but also to make men aware of the kind of concerns that were in industry, and hopefully to get them to kind of have their eyes open to make sure that they didn't contribute to the problem. What year was the article published, Judy? I think it was 2008. I'm pretty sure it was. Anyway, Judy was first author, so if you looked up Gill, it would come from there. Okay, another question is, our female engineering students do well, we don't have a problem dropping out, and the major problem is attracting them. How can we attract more? Again, a very large issue, and it is true now that the recent statistics show that women do tend to do well. Well, women have always done well in the engineering programs, but they have in the past dropped out. The recent studies are kind of conflicting, but some of them do show that women have higher retention, which is basically partly because they're well qualified in the first place and also pretty determined. The major problem about attracting that is very true, and there's a lot of aspects of that, including the necessary maths and science background, and all of the problems that go with that, which go really right back to elementary school and early high school, etc. And the other things that the studies have shown consistently that things like role models, having kind of opportunities for them to find out more about engineering are really, really important. Mary, do you want to answer some of these?
I'm trying to keep up. Actually, they're coming in so thick and fast, and it is very interesting how many people are asking questions, which you've already addressed, Julie, about retaining and attracting women into industry, that's a focus here as well. But just looking at this one here.
Any recommendations on making people aware of gender issues? That is something that Mary and I worked on quite a lot in the inclusive curriculum project that occurred at our university a few years ago. And it's a tough thing, and you've really just got to keep putting it in front of them over and over again. So, I don't know that you can do much more than that. Have these, we ran workshops, we had seminars, and I'm constantly picking people up in meetings and things like that. So they kind of a bit careful now, but I think it's just something you've just got to keep persisting with.
Yes, we did actually do some workshops on learning styles, and found that this, although it's such a disputed sort of area, it did help people to focus on the fact that there might be differences in the way different people approach their learning, not necessarily gender differences, but just and anything like that which opens up the views of an individual teacher to diversity, all helps, I think, to make the whole class more inclusive.
Okay, well, I'm not sure whether Daryl comes back on now, but we'll probably wrap it up now because it's 12:30 in the night here, so we're all ready for bed. And thank you very much for your participation and all your comments, and it's been great to see the interest that we've had from everybody here. So I'd urge you to have a look at some of those other resources, and also feel free to contact us if you have any particular questions. Our contact details are also on the web. So
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Julie, I just want to tell everyone to say thank you to you three as well. They stayed up late into the evening. It's past midnight in Australia, so we definitely want to give you a special round of applause for that. Thank you. Again, the webinar will be up later on this week. If no later than Friday or Monday, we'll have it up, and I will email the slides out to all the participants, all the registrants. Okay? So we thank you very much, and we'll hopefully check back again for future webinars from IEEE USA. Bye-bye.
Okay.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Okay.
Yes.
Bye.
Absolutely. Bye-bye.
Yep. All right, we'll see you later, Mary. I'm going to cut all y'all off now, okay?
Okay.
All right,
Okay.
bye-bye.
Bye.
Oh.
Bye.
Oof. Where are we? Are we off? Are we?
No, we're still